In 1972, Johnny Nash released the hit single, "I Can See Clearly Now, the Rain Has Gone." You probably recognise the words. It continues, "I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's going to be a bright, bright, sunshiny day." We don't want dark clouds in life. We want to enjoy bright sunshine. We don't want darkness. We want to see clearly. Some of us know the frustration of fuzzy sight, needing glasses, needing cataracts done, having to have our eyes seen to. But it's not just about our eyesight. All of us know the difficulties of not seeing clearly, that is, of not understanding. Seeing clearly is one of those phrases which has a double meaning, and this is true in our Bible passage today. On one level, the story in John chapter 9 is about a physically blind man coming to see clearly. It's an amazing miracle. Yet it's also about this same man coming to see Jesus clearly, recognizing who Jesus is. And this is a miracle too. How good is your eyesight? How clearly do you see Jesus? This story will help us to think afresh about ourselves as well as about Jesus. It's actually quite a fun story in places and should make us smile. We'll go through the story first and then get into the details. Then we'll think about some of the implications for us today. The story is in three parts. There's the miracle, the man, and the message. So firstly, let's hear about the miracle. That's in verses 1 through to 8. The account of what happens is brief. Jesus sees a man blind from birth. He spits mud onto the ground and makes some mud with the saliva. After putting the mud on the man's eyes, he tells him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. The man goes, he washes, he comes home seeing. This is an amazing miracle. But more is going on in the story. Just before the miracles, the disciples ask him an intriguing question. They think the man's blindness is because of his sin. Either his own sin or his parents'. Which is it, they ask. Jesus answers, neither. But Jesus continues in verse 3. This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Our eyes are on the blind man. What is the work of God that will be displayed in him? If the story stopped with the healing, then that would be our answer. But there's more going on. Our attention is now fixed on the man born blind. So let's turn to the man. We see that in verses 9 through to 34. The man holds on to one piece of evidence. He was blind, but now he can see. People start to talk. Is this the man born blind who used to sit and beg? Some think so. Others are not so sure. No, he only looks like him. The man himself pipes up, I am the man. He tells them what happened. At this point, he refers to Jesus as the man called Jesus. Then the man finds himself brought to the Pharisees. His testimony is the same. Jesus put mud on my eyes. I washed and now I see. The Pharisees aren't impressed. Their concern is that this alleged event happened on the Sabbath day. If it happened, then Jesus is a sinner for breaking the Sabbath. If it didn't happen, then this man is a liar. They're divided amongst themselves and so turn to the man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replies in verse 17, he is a prophet. Not convinced by the man's testimony, the Pharisees haul in the blind man's parents for questioning. They confirm that their son was born blind. But they don't know how he can see or who opened his eyes. Ask him, they say. It now transpires that the Pharisees had already decided against Jesus. He cannot be the Messiah. To be put to say otherwise, to say Jesus is the Messiah risks their wrath. You'll be put out of the synagogue and cut off from the community. So the Pharisees get the blind man in for further questioning. It's clear that the man born blind, it's clear that he was born blind and so isn't lying. Therefore, Jesus must be a sinner for breaking the Sabbath. Their questioning gets rougher. The blind man is up to the task, though, and gets under their skin. He sticks to his testimony. Whether this man is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. He even gets a little cheeky with them. When asked again what happened, he says, why? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? It's like a red rag to a bull. They are furious and dig in their heels. But the blind man has been thinking. The Pharisees' arguments make no sense. He can see, and Jesus did it. So Jesus must be someone special. He must come from God. The Pharisees will not listen. They turn on the blind man. You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Then we come to the third part, the message, verses 35 to 41. In the final scene, the man finally sees Jesus. Jesus hears that they had thrown him out. He finds him and he speaks with him. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Jesus asks. That is, do you believe in the great King God promised to send? Do you believe in the one God promised to provide to sort everything out in the world? Jesus says, you have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking to you. Finally, the man sees. Lord, I believe, he says, and he worships Jesus. This is the response of a person who believes. When did the man see? He could see with his eyes back in verse 8. Now in verse 38, he sees Jesus truly and shows this in his response to Jesus. How does he see? Jesus has opened his eyes. This is the work of God, from verse 3. In his famous hymn, Amazing Grace, John Newton describes his experience of coming to Christ. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. This is the testimony of all believers. We were blind. We didn't see who Jesus is. He made little difference to us. But then God intervened. God intervened and gave us the eyes to see Jesus. For some, this change is sudden. For others, it happens over time. In this story, the blind man grows in his understanding of who Jesus is. The pressure he faces to turn from Jesus is actually what helps him hold on to Jesus more deeply. Yet in this story, though the blind man comes to see Jesus clearly, his opponents go in the opposite direction. The Pharisees are faced with clear evidence and strong personal testimony to the power of Jesus. They investigate, they hear from witnesses, but they will not listen. Their minds are already made up. They even turn against the people who come to a different view. The irony is that they are the ones who think they can see clearly. They keep saying, we know, but they don't know. They don't see. They are in fact ignorant. They are blind. The blind man and his opponents illustrate the main message from Jesus. Jesus says in verse 39, for judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. Jesus is the light of the world. He gives sight to the spiritually blind. Our response to him should match that of the blind man. He says to Jesus, Lord, I believe, and he worships. That is, he gives himself to Christ. This isn't a one-off action. It's the beginning of an ongoing devotion to Jesus, where Jesus becomes more and more precious. To make such a response to Jesus, we need to be humbled. By nature, we are proud. We're all proud. We like to take credit for our achievements. In coming to Christ, though, there is no credit for us. We come to believe only because God works in us through Jesus. He must open our eyes to see. Grasping this more deeply will deepen our thanks to God and help us persevere in our ongoing worship of Jesus. And finally, even though the world might be hostile to Jesus and his followers, This is not reason to give up on Christ. Unbelief is often based on ignorance or prejudice. We need to redouble our efforts to pray that people's eyes would be opened to the truth of Jesus. And we need to keep testifying to others the truth of what he has done for us. He has opened our eyes to see. He can open other people's eyes too.